Okay, you are here. Welcome to Voting Rights 2026, Navigating the Policy Landscape. My name is Gwen Stembridge. I am the Director of Education and Partnerships at Nonprofit Vote, and we're excited to welcome you to our first June webinar. Wanted to give just a couple of announcements and housekeeping here. A recording of this webinar will be sent within the next week to everyone who registered. So you'll be able to get that along with a copy of the slides. There is closed captioning available via Zoom, so please do take advantage of that if that is helpful for you. Actually, there is a Q&A today. So sorry that slide was there. There is Q&A today. We will be doing that. Please put your Q&A in the Q&A box that is at the bottom, in the black bar at the bottom of your screen there. Please do also use the chat to introduce yourself, and then use that react button. You can let us know if you're excited about what you're hearing, if you're disappointed. There's some news about some policy things I know that are disappointing, but we're really at the end of the day, we are here to get empowered to take action, and knowledge is power, and so we're getting informed here, which is great. This is how we will spend our next hour or so. Tell you a little bit about Nonprofit Vote in case you're not familiar. You may be newer to this work. And then we've got a few speakers. We're going to start out with Michael Lee from the Brennan Center for Justice, who's going to talk to us about the Voting Rights Act, or the VRA. That is an acronym that we may use throughout. There are lots of acronyms that may come up, especially when we're talking about these policy things. I will try as much as possible, and I ask our panelists to do the same, to explain those when they come up. But if we miss one, please do feel free to ask about those in the chat, and we will be sure to clarify them. But VRA, the Voting Rights Act, and the Callais Supreme Court case. Then we'll talk about some kind of longer term conversation and strategies. And then we're going to close out with what nonprofits can do now. That is the focus. And as we do in these webinars, we always have a call to action. Our team is made up of a lot of community organizers. And so we come to this work with the knowledge that having a call to action is really important. So we've got that for you as well before we close out at the top of the hour. So I'll start out just telling you a little bit about Nonprofit Vote. So Nonprofit Vote has been around for 20 years as of this year, thanks to this little penguin who is helping us celebrate that. But 20 years is a long time to be doing this work, but there were many folks doing this work before us, and there will be many doing this work going forward. And what is this work? Our mission as Nonprofit Vote is to equip the nation's nonprofits, which is you all who are showing up to this webinar. We are here to equip you with the tools and resources that you need to engage your communities in voting and in elections and in our democracy. And as part of that, our vision is to then have a more inclusive democracy. If the communities that you all are serving, often communities who have fallen through the cracks of the system and are not being served by the system, if you all engage those communities in voting, then we have a more inclusive and a more representative and a more fair democracy. So that is the goal here. And that is our work at Nonprofit Vote. These are our speakers for the day. We're so thrilled to have Michael Lee, who's senior counsel in the democracy team at the Brennan Center for Justice, who's a prolific writer and attorney who is here to give us his expertise, especially around gerrymandering and around redistricting, and is here to talk to us about the implications of the SCOTUS ruling, SCOTUS being Supreme Court of the United States, the Callais case that recently came down, that decision. So Michael is here to give us that legal perspective. And then we'll have Brian Miller, who is our very own Nonprofit Vote Executive Director, who's here to talk to us about the future a little bit. What are some of those possibilities? What are some of the conversations that are happening since that Callais case decision came down? so that we can dream a little bit and imagine, but also think about some of the longer term implications of this decision. And then rounding us out is Adrienne Kelly, who's the Executive Director of Democracy North Carolina, who has been doing this democracy work for many, many years, has been a wonderful partner of Nonprofit Vote, and it sits on our leadership council. And she is going to talk with us about what nonprofits can do now in this moment. What can you all walk away with today to do, because we have an election coming up in not very long, in just a few months here. So I'm going to start out and I will pass here to Michael to talk to us about the VRA. On to you, Michael.
Yeah, well, thank you, Gwen. Oh, thank you, Gwen, for having me here. And I'm glad to be here with all of you. I unfortunately am talking about a little bit of a dark subject, but an important one. As folks may have heard, at the end of April, the Supreme Court ruled in a case called Louisiana versus Calais against Black voters in Louisiana who had fought and won a second Black congressional district in litigation this decade. But the Supreme Court ruled that in a way that set the stage for the state to redraw the map to and to take Louisiana back to having just one Black congressional district. And we're already seeing the ramifications of this case play out. I'm going to talk about what's going on right now because there's literally so much. And when I do this presentation, like sometimes you prepare a presentation and you can just pull it off the shelf and give it again and again and again. But like because of everything that's happening around the country, I constantly have to go and look and make sure that everything I have is up to date because there is bad stuff constantly happening. So first, a little bit of context. The Voting Rights Act of 1965 is the most transformative law probably passed ever in U.S. history. It really opens up the door to representation for Black and Latino and other voters of color around the country, especially in the South. And it really comes out, it's the crowning achievement of the civil rights movement. And the part that I'm going to talk about is a part called Section 2, which requires you to draw districts that keep Black voters and other voters of color together if the existing electoral systems are shutting them out of power. And so if you think about a town that's 75% white, 25% Black, if everybody's electing everybody at large, and there's racially polarized voting, the white communities candidates are going to get 75% of the vote. The Black communities candidates are going to get 25% of the vote and always lose. But if instead you create districts and keep Black neighborhoods together, then you end up with a district that's majority Black, and they could win 1/4 of the seats, which is rough. This example, exactly what their percentage of the population is. And so that's what the Voting Rights Act required states and localities to do under certain circumstances where there's racially polarized voting, where there's a legacy of intentional racial discrimination that still needs to be remedied. And it was a really powerful tool because in 1965, there were 4 Black members of Congress, none from the South, and only 5 Latino members of Congress. And really what, particularly after the 1980s and reforms that were signed under President Ronald Reagan, the number of minority opportunity districts really exploded. But of course, what happens in Calais is that the Supreme Court has basically said, said a number of things, and they're a little bit technical, but like the biggest one is that states can use politics as a defense for racial discrimination. And so, basically say like, well, our goal is to make sure we have more Republicans. And, if that means destroying Black districts, that's okay because it was just politics, despite the fact that race and party are oftentimes very closely aligned, especially in the South. So after Calais, which again was April 29th, you've already seen a number of states rush to redraw maps, in particular 4 states, Louisiana itself, Alabama, Tennessee, and Florida have already redrawn their congressional maps to eliminate 1 or more Black or Latino opportunity districts. Another 3 states, Texas, Mississippi, and Georgia, have already signaled that they will redraw maps not for the 2026 midterms, but for 2028, Georgia will begin redrawing just in a few days. Um, and we expect other states to join them. Now, I should say that in Louisiana, Alabama, Tennessee, and Florida, there are legal challenges pending to the redraws, but we will see where those get. So and I'll run through a little bit about what's happening around the country. And I believe this was up to date like 30 minutes ago, but as I said, lots of stuff is happening. So like something may have happened in the interim. So Louisiana itself, when Calais came down, Louisiana was actually in the process of holding their 2026 primaries. And what the state did in a rush to redraw and eliminate one of the black districts, canceled the primary and just 80,000 people had already voted. They said, that's okay. We're just suspending it and we're going to move the primary to November. And they then proceeded to redraw the map to take away one of the black districts, the one that was created in litigation this decade, and go back to having one black district, only the yellow district that runs between New Orleans and Baton Rouge. Um, so let's see. Oh, yeah. Also, Alabama, which was the subject of a lot of fierce litigation this decade, and um, uh, Alabama also really went. Uh, so Alabama voters in 2023 won at the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court said yes, Alabama needs to create a second black congressional district. That was a major victory. But then after Calais, Alabama rushed to redraw the map. There were appeals to the Supreme Court and efforts to block it at the Supreme Court. Those were ultimately unsuccessful, and Alabama has since adopted not a new map, but a map that it drew in 2023 that another court had already found was intentionally discriminatory. So the Supreme Court just a few days ago allowed Alabama to use a map that is actually found by a court to be racially discriminatory. And that is the map that Alabama will use this year. Let's see, Tennessee also was very fast. Now, Tennessee only had one black majority district, the blue district on the left, which is basically the city of Memphis and some of the surrounding areas. Memphis gets divided up in the new map among three different districts, and black voters no longer have the ability to elect a congressional member in a city that is very heavily black. Republicans had similarly eliminated a very competitive district in the Nashville area earlier in the decade. And so now the map is 9-0, all Republican, and no districts where voters of color really have a shot at winning anything anymore. Um, it, to give you a sense of like how crazy people are in this rush, Tennessee, to pass this new map, also passed a bill that eliminated the requirement that voters be told that they're in a new congressional district. So when voters go to vote, they may be actually surprised that they are no longer in the district that they thought they were. This seems patently unfair. It is. This is well, not a wonderful, but a really telling photo of the debate on the map in the Tennessee legislature. This is actually a state representative wearing a Trump flag into the debate about eliminating the black district in the Memphis area. There is litigation going on over Tennessee. It has so far not been successful. I'll go very quickly to Florida. Florida also redrew its map to eliminate, to create only four Democratic districts. And one of the things that they did is they really redrew the districts of Darren Soto, who's Latino, and Maxwell Frost, who represented an adjacent district, and Maxwell Frost is both Latino and Black. They made another number of other changes in South Florida. There is litigation pending over this, but it also so far is surviving court challenges. I mentioned three states are going to redraw in 2028. One of them is South Carolina. It was a little bit surprising because South Carolina was expected to redraw this year. There was actually some Republican opposition, and they voted to postpone the bill till next year. So South Carolina likely will get a new map, but it won't be for the midterms, it'll be for 2028, and the changes would eliminate the district currently represented by Congressman Jim Clyburn. Georgia is also going to hold a special session this summer to redraw its political maps. And one of the people that people expect to be targeted is Congressman Sanford Bishop from South Georgia. The reason they're holding the session this summer is probably because they're a little bit worried that there might be a Democratic governor in Georgia next year, or that Democrats might take one or both of the legislative chambers. So if they're going to redraw the map, they need to do so now, and so that is happening in Georgia, and happening really very soon. But again, for 2028, finally, Texas. Texas, as you may recall, already redo its maps once this decade to target 5 seats represented mostly by members of color. But they have already signaled that they are going to redraw the maps again in 2027 when the legislature meets, and not only the congressional map, but also legislative maps, the State Board of Education. Texas is interesting because Texas, when they defended the 2025 maps, that they did not take race into account at all in drawing the maps, that they were solely doing it for political reasons. But now lawmakers have signaled that, well, maybe they paid a little bit too much attention to race when they were drawing the maps, despite the fact that they said they considered race not at all. Their story is flipping, and we will see what the Supreme Court does with that. Um, Mississippi also. Mississippi also is likely to eliminate the seat of Congressman Benny Thompson for the 2028 election. So I will. There is a Democratic response. 7 Democratic states have signaled they may do something. Maryland may go this year. The other states would likely redraw only for 2028. A number of states like Virginia and New York have some procedural hurdles that they need to go through. But there is a Democratic response, and this is where we are in a constant redistricting war every 2 years. Um, and you can see, so far, particularly with the redraw of Black districts after Calais, Republicans are getting a significant advantage in this year's midterms in all likelihood, based on this. So. Finally, two more things. One is the Department of Justice is also getting involved. This Senator Eric Schmidt from Missouri, right after Calais, tweeted, that DOJ should sue to dismantle minority opportunity districts around the country. Harmeet Dillon, who heads the voting section at DOJ, replied, "Senator, we are on it." And this is really sort of a shocking sort of turn of events, because many times in our history, DOJ has been negligent in enforcing voting rights. It has never actually been on the bad side of voting rights and affirmatively seeking to attack the political power of Black and Latino and other voters of color around the country. Finally, there there's a looming threat of redraws at the local level. Many after the Voting Rights Act, many localities, school boards, city councils, county commissions were forced to abandon at-large elections and go to districted elections that helped increase political power for voters of color around the country. But there already is a big attempt to go back and do that. So far, the efforts have, good news, been unsuccessful, but they will not stop. And we fully expect a lot to be happening at the local level in the coming years, possibly even this year, but certainly next year in the lead up to the 2030 census. And it is important to remember that most Section 2 cases have, well, first of all, they've been mostly in the South, but they've mostly involved local governments, right? They haven't involved Congress. The congressional cases get a lot of attention, but really the big work of Section 2 was that it opened the door for voters of color to win power at in some of the bodies that have the biggest impact on people's lives. So I think that is all I have. Yep, that's what I have. So I'm happy to turn it over back to Gwen.
Thank you so much, Michael. I think a lot of these things can feel overwhelming at times, so really appreciate you breaking it down for us. Next, I'm going to pass it on to our very own Brian Miller to talk about long-term considerations and strategies.
Thank you, Gwen. Obviously, everything that Michael just shared is upsetting, distressing, anxiety-inducing. It's frustrating for those of us who work to build an inclusive democracy for a long time. There's absolutely no question that Calais was a huge setback for the work to build an inclusive democracy. However, there are some policy levers we have left. And I think that's what I want to talk a little bit about is where's there signs of hope of restoring some element of that. And the first thing I'll do is talk a little bit about some of the policies that we do still have, and some of the opportunities we still have. Obviously, there is going to be ongoing litigation, right? There's going to be people challenging as Michael mentioned, there's court cases against some of those redraws that just took place. In Tennessee, for example, one could certainly argue that these new districts violate the compactness principle or some other stuff. And we can certainly put out some hope that some of this litigation slows this down. Absent that, we're getting into new policies. What are the policies that can be passed at the federal and or state level that can tone down some of what's going on? And the first of which is a ban on partisan gerrymandering, right? There is right now, as the Supreme Court noted, partisan gerrymandering is legal. They say you can absolutely do this, and it is being used as a cover for what is otherwise, policy redistricting wars that really put communities of color out of power, right? But it also has a partisan implication. The Freedom to Vote Act, which is a bill at the congressional level, does include a ban on partisan gerrymandering. It also includes a lot of other good election policy stuff. That bill probably won't go anywhere under this Congress. But could we start building support for, I personally believe you probably could get some support across the aisle for a clean ban on partisan gerrymandering, but that'll be a long-term fight people will have to do and look at moving in Congress. The second federal policy change thing is something to restore pre-clearance. And that was something that was lost in the earlier Supreme Court ruling when they undid Section 1 of the Voting Rights Act, which required any major changes to election districts in states that had a history of violation to get pre-approved before they could implement those. The John Lewis Voting Rights Act would, among other things, restore pre-clearance at the federal level. Well, it would restore pre-clearance, period, but that's a federal rule. Obviously, both of these are going to face a significant challenge in the current Congress, which is why many groups are starting to push for state-level Voting Rights Act or state-level VRAs. And in some of these state VRAs, a lot of them look very different. Most of them include a ban on partisan gerrymandering, specifically at the state and local level. Obviously, as long as we're having these wars nationally over redistricting, it wouldn't make sense probably to prohibit partisan gerrymandering in congressional races unless all 50 states do it. Otherwise, you're tying your hands, but you could ban it within the state. Some of these state VRAs also restore pre-clearance. Now, what the state VRAs would be limited in their ability to do is bring back some of the racially based framework that Section 2 gave us, because the Callais ruling would supersede those state VRAs and prohibit them from using race as a basis for drawing districts, even if it means in an effort to ensure inclusive representation. And these are conversations we need to start having. Yes, Calais happened, it's bad. Now what do we do? What are those levers of policy that we can use to start building back an inclusive democracy? This last thing I want to talk about is alternative models, and this is really thinking outside of the box. There's different ways to do it. I actually had a conversation with someone at a conference recently, one of our funders, who argued for increasing the size of the House of Representatives, under the premise that the smaller the districts are, the harder they are to gerrymander. At some point, it becomes difficult. You also fix the electoral college problem at the same time. Those are big changes. But the one I really want to talk about is really multi-member proportional representation. And it is something that is gaining steam in the post-Calais world. Because all of these district fights that Michael just shared, The reason legislators are able to draw districts to exclude one population or include another to engineer partisan advantage is because they are winner-take-all single-member districts. And as long as you have winner-take-all single-member districts, you can draw the lines in some way to advantage a party or to advantage a particular racial group or whatever, or exclude others. Now, this is sort of it's not super common in the United States. It is used widely in many democracies around the world. However, there are a number of cities in the United States that are actually using multi-member proportional districts for their city council and governance structures. And there's more adopting it each year. I'm going to talk about Portland, Oregon as an example. They have a 12-member city council. And in that city council, there are 4 multi-member districts. So there's four city council districts. There's 12 representatives on the council. Each district elects 3 city councilors. Now, this is fundamentally different from the at-large districts, which the VRA ruled out, because in this case, everyone basically gets 1 vote for their candidate of choice, but they usually almost always do it with a ranked choice system. So in the case of Portland, maybe there's only 3 seats in the district, maybe there's 9 people running for those seats. So each voter votes for their first preference, their second choice, their third choice, then maybe their 4th choice. And then using a ranked choice voting system, they narrow it down to the top 3 winners, right? But all 3 of those top winners get in, which means if a community is only 25% African-American, say, that community will almost certainly get at least one of those 3 representatives elected that they will be able to choose. And you can't really draw the lines in any way to exclude that group. And by doing so, it ensures minority representation with majority control. And so imagine you've got a community that is 60% one population group, let's say Democrats. You could, and there's 6 districts in that city. You could probably draw those districts in a way that all 6 districts are 60% Democrat and Democrats win all 6 seats. And that's really where, again, this districting happens. But if you split that district and instead you have 2 districts, each electing 3 representatives, it's very, very difficult to block out communities. And almost certainly the Democrats would probably still win 4 of these 6 seats, but the Republicans or whatever the other party would win the other. And the same thing plays out when you look at race and other factors. If you look at it from a partisan standpoint, it effectively puts an end to partisan gerrymandering. We all saw that map of Tennessee. If you had that same map now, if you redrew that map to instead of being 9 districts, you had 3 districts, there's almost no way that Black voters in the state, which represents roughly 35% of the Tennessee population, would elect about 3 of those seats. So, and it would also be roughly that percentage is the percentage Democrat, but the Democrats or the percentage that voted for Kamala in the last election, would win about 3 of those seats. Similarly, in Massachusetts, which also has 9 representative seats and is all 9 are occupied by Democrats, the state, however, like 36% of the state voted for Trump in the last election. So if you played that out with a proportional representation, probably and you divided the state into 3 districts, each with 3 representatives, roughly 3 of those seats would end up going to Republicans. And instead of a nation of red and blue states, we'd be a nation of different hues of purple, is what we would end up looking at. And then, of course, the same thing plays out when you look at race, as noted, because when you start drawing districts and you start creating multi-member districts, even if Latinos only represent 20% of the population in that district, they're going to elect at least one of those representatives, right? And so once you redraw, in this case, Texas, you go from having 11 current Latino seats to 16. You go from having 2 Black seats to 5. And so it ensures that communities of color are able to gain a seat. This is a big, different idea than what we're all used to in the country. It's not going to happen at the congressional level anytime soon. But what's happening is people are pushing it at the municipal level as a model right now. So all across the country, there are groups saying, hey, look, it's as long as we have single member district, it's going to be very difficult to build an inclusive democracy, especially with Calais, expressly prohibiting the use of race as a primary driver for drawing district lines. And so are there other ways to get here? One of those is that alternative model. And so people are pushing that at the municipal level, sort of with the idea that we build up steam over a few years and eventually you start getting some states doing it. There's a lot to unpack there, but there's a blog that I just posted on our website. That blog, which we can put in the chat window right now. Also at the bottom of it, there's a lot of links on additional resources, including a video which shows you how a voting system works like that. But all of these are strategies we need to be looking at. We need to be looking at, again, cheering on the ongoing litigation, supporting it, banning partisan gerrymandering, restoring pre-clearance, state level VRAs. But at the end of the day, and also thinking outside of the box about some really wild and very different strategies like, the proportional. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Adrian because we only have 5 months. All of this stuff are long-term strategies. For now, we have an election in 5 months, and we need to be mobilizing for that while having long-term discussions. Gwen.
Thank you so much, Brian. I know it is hard to think about these like bigger long-term things sometimes, but I think it's really valuable to imagine. There are some folks, about 250 years ago that imagined a different way of doing government. So it's nice to have that as well. But Adrian's going to bring us home and talk to us about what we need to do now before this election. So passing over to you, Adrian.
Thanks for having me, Gwen and Brian. Really appreciate it. Democracy North Carolina is a voting rights organization advocating at the North Carolina Legislature and State Board of Elections, educating voters and organizing communities to keep the public informed and engaged. And I want to thank Michael for breaking down the Callais decision. This is the latest and perhaps the most egregious act of voter suppression and representation we have seen since before the 1960s. But make no mistake, this is just one more action in a trifecta of governmental bodies seeking to prevent voters from voting and ballots from counting. SCOTUS, Supreme Court of the United States, has now joined Congress, state legislatures, and courts, state courts, the state boards of elections to deny eligible citizens their right to vote. In North Carolina, for example, mail-in voting time has been reduced. There's no grace period for receiving ballots, and the time to cure ballots has been reduced from 9 to 3 days. North Carolina also has the dubious honor to be the only state in the country where the state auditor supervises the State Board of Elections. But this is happening all across the country. In 2025, over 1,500 voting bills were filed, most of them restricting voter access. And these are a few of examples on your screen of what's happening in nearly 20 states. Mississippi, for example, has no grace period for absentee ballots. Texas has added a sworn statement requirement for disabled and elderly curbside voters. New Hampshire requires proof of citizenship and has done that for quite some time. Kansas eliminated their grace period for mail-in ballots. Indiana requires a proof of citizenship at registration. North Dakota no longer accepted mail-in ballots at the polls. And North Carolina joined 11 other states to implement the SAVE database. This database matches state voter lists with a federal database, which is known to be error-prone, and it's done this under the auspices of removing non-citizen voters. So what's happened? 2 days after implementation, our State Board of Elections removed 34,000 allegedly deceased registrants who most certainly didn't vote after they died. Had we implemented the ERIC program to cross-check registrations across states a few years ago, these registrations would already have been flagged. And despite uncovering these thousands of deceased registrants, there have been no announcements of finding non-citizens on the list since this was implemented over a month ago. There's been a lot of research around the allegations of non-citizens voting by a number of nonprofits. In fact, the Brennan Center for Justice did research and had findings that 0.0001% of those folks who had voted were non-citizens. And in Utah, they did a sample of 1.8 million votes, which yielded one non-citizen voter. In most of these cases, any non-citizen or other kinds of fraud voting is uncovered in the canvass period in any case. So these laws and rules that I've described across many states are increasing the number of hurdles that voters must jump through to cast their ballot. In addition, when you combine these acts of suppression with the gaps that already exist in turnout, you can see that in 2024, for example, only 73% of eligible voters were registered and 65% of registered voters voted. So we definitely do not have a problem in this country of too many people voting. But there are attempts to further restrict participation. In North Carolina, for example, there are attempts to make third-party voter registration illegal. Think about the groups who register voters at festivals, at churches, at schools, at food banks, etc. And our state board has recently announced they will no longer make paper registration materials available. I'm not making this up, folks. If people don't or can't register online, individuals will have to contact their county board for a registration form. Now, it's likely that most citizens are not even familiar with their county board, its functions, or how to contact them. But the burden is being put on the voter, adding one more hurdle to voting. And this election, in just 5 months, will be the most consequential of our lives. We really can do better. So I think there are 3 actions that are critical and are needed. Okay, first let's talk about voter registration, which I see as the gateway to an engaged electorate. Pre-registration is available today for varying ages in 49 states and DC. Callais and other actions of voter suppression are not just about 2026. You saw this in Michael's presentation and in Brian's as well, but it's about 2028, which is a presidential election, and also about the 2030 census. So we really have to think long term. Young people will inherit the policies and practices that are in place today. So they need to be a core constituent as we expand the electorate. It's important that we reach young people where they are, in high schools, at YMCAs, churches, sports events, wherever young people gather. And it's important that parents are involved to ensure their children register. Research proves that by voting at an early age, just like anything else, it becomes habit forming. And this is one habit we want citizens to have. I snuck a photo in here. This is my son who's voting for the first time in 2020. He pre-registered as a 16-year-old in 2018 and has since voted in every election. Now, to my dismay, he lives in another state now, but he does research those folks who are running for office there, canvasses for candidates of choice, and encourages his friends to understand the issues pertinent to them and to vote accordingly. That is the kind of behavior that we want to instill in young people. Nonprofit organizations play an important role. They're uniquely qualified to fight back against suppression by registering voters. Many nonprofits currently register voters, whether they are direct service organizations working with their clientele or organizations that espouse democratic values. And of course, the nonprofit voter registration day is a focused opportunity, but I say don't wait until September 15th. Get started right now. We all have to watch for legislation or rules that curb registration legislation or rules that curb registration and speak out by calling and writing our representatives and by showing up at Board of Elections meetings to hold officials account. The second area of focus must be voter education, which is the cornerstone of being an informed voter. There are many avenues to get information these days, whether it's on cable news, the radio, all kinds of social media, TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, Blue Sky, etc. There's word of mouth, and there are even a few newspapers still out there. To be informed voters, we must separate information from misinformation and disinformation. Misinformation being falsehoods that are shared without the intent to deceive. So it might be something your friend sends you because they saw a TikTok post, but it's really not correct information. And then disinformation is there to deliberately try to mislead you. If you think about the bots that are out there, some of those coming from Russia or China or wherever. It's important to identify trusted messengers, and there are many. Across the country, you have the Brennan Center, ACLU, NAACP, Nonprofit Vote, Common Cause, and in North Carolina, we have Democracy North Carolina. These are all groups that believe in the democratic process, that voting is a right, and all citizens should be able to freely exercise the franchise. There are a variety of ways to gather information, whether it's through nonpartisan voter guides, phone banks, internet research, issue forums, canvassing, and candidate forums. Nonpartisan organizations play a key role here in that our focus is not on who to vote for, but on the what, when, where, and how one can gather the data that they need to make an informed decision and ensure their vote counts. And I'm showing you on this slide a number of the, what do I mean by the what? For example, what offices are in play and how those offices might impact your life and the life of those in your community. The impact of SCOTUS, again, the Supreme Court of the United States, torching the Voting Rights Act led multiple states to immediately change their districts. You heard that from Michael earlier. Voters need to verify their congressional districts before you go vote and what candidates you're eligible to vote for. We're even seeing actions taken at the city and county level that can alter a voter's ability to choose their representatives. And don't forget to read the fine print in ballot measures or amendments that may be on your ballots this year. These measures often sound appealing, but may have negative impacts on your community. And nonprofit organizations play a key role in deciphering these potential laws as well. Election protection is the ultimate safeguard to protect your vote and ensure that it counts. Election protection is not a one-time discrete action. It takes place on a year-round basis, before, during, and after elections. Prior to an election, nonprofits and volunteers can advocate for accessible voting sites, an appropriate number of them in a given county, and extended or weekend hours. And they can advocate on other issues as well, on local issues as well. Excuse me. In Bladen County in North Carolina, for example, the Board of Commissioners recently sought to revert to a 5-member commission structure and potentially make them all at-large seats, shifting from the current 9-district combination of a district and at-large seats. The rationale stated for this was because of Section 2 of the VRA was removed. So now we can do it. This change would likely prevent the Black community from having any representation in their county government. Nonprofits and community advocates rallied around this, attended the next board meeting, and spoke out about this change. And it didn't hurt that the press was present too. The board backed down and left the current structure intact. So we can have an impact. There's a similar effort underway in Jacksonville City Council in North Carolina. I think Michael also mentioned that. Election protection advocates are speaking out against that as well. And we all need to watch for these kinds of situations in our own states and communities. So that was the before. Then during early voting and on election day, many organizations provide volunteer or paid vote protectors at polling locations. These individuals serve as watchdogs at the sites, making sure that voting rules are in place, things like curbside voting being in place, that electioneering is outside of the perimeter, that there's accessible transportation nearby, and they're watching the length of the voting lines. When there are breaches of these rules, or if a voter cannot cast their vote successfully, the individual or volunteer vote protector can call the national hotline, 866 Our Vote, or in North Carolina, they can call 888 Our Vote. There are other hotlines as well that serve non-native speakers, just as involved individuals, and people with disabilities. These hotlines are staffed with legal teams that work to solve voter challenges in real time, so a vote can be cast successfully. This year in particular, with the various hints, rumors, and even statements from the administration about potential ICE or federal employees at the polls, vote protectors will be on high alert for this illegal behavior, and many organizations are providing training on de-escalation and safeguards for such an occurrence. After Election Day is the third phase of this. Election protection continues. Nonprofit staffers and volunteers observe the canvass process at county boards of elections to observe how provisional ballots are handled, which votes will count and which won't. These observers can also report concerns over mishandling of votes to their respective hotline as well. At Democracy NC, we use the results of our 888 Our Vote hotline calls, both the data and anecdotes, to analyze the common themes and trends in a given election, particularly where voters hit obstacles, then use that information to advocate for better laws with the legislature or administrative processes with the state board. And as individuals, it is important for you to know your rights, what ID is required, when is a provisional ballot appropriate, that you can vote as long as you're in line when the polls have closed. And then the cycle begins again. So let me summarize by saying that both nonprofit organizations and individuals have a responsibility to make a plan, to determine their role, whether it's in registering, educating, or protecting the vote. Nonprofits should evaluate their strengths, their volunteer base, and the communities they serve to determine how they can make the most impact to maximize the number of citizens who are prepared to vote and carry it through. And for individuals, they can make a positive difference in a myriad of ways, and I've listed a number of them here. And I always say to staff and other people that I meet that no one has to do everything, but everyone should do something. Thank you for your attention to this critical matter, and I'll turn it back to you, Gwen.
Thank you so much, Adrian. Yes, this critical matter is real. I had to get the confirmation. We are 147 days out from November, and I know that there are primaries happening as well across the country. So thank you so much for getting us all set and ready to go here. The next piece that we have for you all as we start to wrap up is actually our Q&A section. We're going to take just a couple minutes here. There are a few questions that have come through the Q&A section. So I wanted to just share a few of those. I wonder either Brian or if you might want to take this first one. This is a question a little bit unrelated, but I want to make sure we cover it because it is relevant. The USPS rule for mail-in ballots, are lawsuits expected to prevent, is what this person asks. I know we've got a blog about it on our website, but any of our speakers want to take that one?
I think there's one rule. There was a recent change, although it wasn't really as much of a change. Obviously, there's the Supreme Court ruling, which is going to be coming in, hopefully in the next month. We'll have an answer. Hopefully not too bad of an answer, but there is a Supreme Court ruling coming down. But I'm not sure if what they're referencing is earlier. It had long been noted that the only way to guarantee a postmark on a piece of mail was to bring it to the post office and have them postmark it. There was a change that basically, and actually, Gwen, you could probably answer it because I forgot what there was a change on the rule on when they allow a postmark and when the postmark gets set.
Yeah.
That was recently put into effect. In some cases, they codified what was already common practice, but you could probably clarify that. That was the recent changing, and then the future is the Supreme Court ruling that's coming down in the next month. Regardless, we just tell everyone to vote early and give yourself 2 weeks or some good lead time before the election to get ballots in. But when you want to,
Yeah, at least a week. That's the
least a week, yeah.
that's the guidance that we're giving folks. So just make sure if you've got mail-in ballots, make sure that they go in the mail at least a week before the deadline, before election day. It's no longer going to be just that they're postmarked on election day. They actually need to arrive by election day, or can be that's ideal. They need to be postmarked. They won't necessarily be postmarked on the day that you put them in the mail. That's the piece of that. But
And
we've
I
got
will
some
say-
guidance. Jack's going to share the link to our blog there.
I was going
And
to
I would
point out the
just
link just
add-
got posted in the
sorry.
chat window. So
Yeah, I would just add that, that's in particular going to hurt rural voters because they
Yeah.
may drop off at their local site, but unless you ask for a postmark, it won't be postmarked until it goes to the regional office. So in particular, those folks who live far distances from post offices are going to be hurt by that.
Exactly.
and if I can
Great.
just to interject, that is particularly relevant where states say as long as it is postmarked by a certain date, it will be accepted. The Supreme Court ruling that's coming down has to do with regardless of the postmark date, if it was received by a certain date. There's some other things, but for a lot of states, they will honor it so long as it is postmarked by a certain date, and that's where knowing what those rules are is important.
Thank you. Thank you. All right, so back to our topic at hand today. One of the next questions we've got is how does a long-term strategy to ban partisan gerrymandering at the state level add up in Florida, where there's a constitutional ban on partisan gerrymandering, yet it goes on and is upheld by state courts? Many exclamation points, which might indicate frustration with that.
Yeah, I mean, I think Florida obviously is frustrating because in 2016, the Florida Supreme Court, a very different Florida Supreme Court, did force the amendments and forced a redraw of the congressional map to create a very fair congressional map for the first time in many decades. And it is really appalling. We'll see what the Florida Supreme Court does, but it's still pending there. But, I think many people's expectations, given that the court has gotten a lot more seemingly partisan, people's expectations are not necessarily high. I think that really points to the fact that there ultimately needs to be a national solution, right? You cannot go state by state. And I think that's one of the lessons, at least for Congress. I mean, if you want to reform how your legislative districts are drawn, that's one thing, but Congress going state by state, may be the equivalent of unilateral disarmament for one side. And ultimately, there has to be a fix at the federal level, particularly for the South, right? Because, many of the states in the South where all of these abuses are happening are not states where you do ballot initiatives or other things, and their legislatures are unlikely to enact reforms on their own. And so, if you're going to ultimately, fix America, you have to fix the South, and to fix the South, the whole of the history of the South is it's changed, but it's oftentimes required a federal assist, and this is probably not going to be any different.
Absolutely. All right. Next question here was, were there pivotal changes to the two circumstances in April of this year from the inception of the authorization of the VRA to lead to the gutting of Section 2 now? So I think they're asking, yeah, what were those pivotal changes from the inception of the authorization that led to how Section 2 was gutted recently?
So much to
Michael, that
say
might go
here.
back to you. Yeah.
I think, it's very perplexing, and I wouldn't even go back to the authorization of, Section 2, although the most recent reauthorization of provision of Section 2 occurred under President George W. Bush. It was unanimous in the Senate. I think one senator didn't vote, so it was 99-0, and passed overwhelmingly in the House. And, voting rights used to be a bipartisan issue. Um, but you don't even have to go that far back. You just have to go to 2023 when the Supreme Court upheld a ruling in Alabama that said Alabama needed to create a second black district. And it was a decision authored by Chief Justice John Roberts and joined by Associate Justice Brett Kavanaugh, along with the three liberal justices. And so, it was a very strong, logical opinion. And many people thought, well, how do you have the Alabama case and the Louisiana case and have them be consistent in any way? And it really is hard to see how they are being consistent, I guess, to, you know, be as fair as possible to Justice Alito, who wrote the Louisiana opinion. Like, I do think for a lot of the conservative justices, they do think like this is really all just politics, and like we aren't really racist anymore, and like this is just a way to help Democrats, and like all's fair in politics. But more broadly, I do think like you see a retreat by federal courts from enforcing fairness in redistricting, both in the partisan like they in 2019 they said we're not going to hear partisan gerrymandering claims, and now they basically have said like you really can't bring Voting Rights Act claims. And so they've said it's a wild, wild west, and we're okay with that, and that's why Congress ultimately needs to act.
Thank you, thank you. So we're close to time here. I want to wrap up. Thank you so much to all of our speakers, to Michael and to Brian and to Adrian. This is really timely information, and like we said, 147 days to go. So I want to leave you with our call to action, which is a different topic that will make sure that you get information on here. But some of you may have heard about the Office of Management and Budget, the OMB, on the federal level, that is currently considering a rule that would really impact nonprofits who receive federal funding, and their ability to do voter engagement work. There are some other DEI implications as well. But we've got some resources that we just published on our website, and we just want to encourage folks to submit a comment. You can do so as a nonprofit. We've got the links here. Again, all of these slides will be shared with you after the webinar. And so we've got links where you can go and submit a comment. But there are so many policy issues that are coming forth that are impacting nonprofits and your ability to do voter engagement work, but you can still do this work. And I think, as Adrian told us, the urgency and the critical nature of this is important. So please know that you still are able to do this work, and it is necessary and very important. So we've got a bunch of tools on our website that can help walk you through that. So please do visit our resource library, nonprofitvote.org. And also the recording of this webinar will be there as well. So thank you all again. Thank you, Michael. Thank you, Adrian. Thank you, Brian. And we'll see you all on the 24th for the next webinar about arts engagement and creative engagement as well. Take care, you all. Have a good one.